Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. T Show. I am Dr. T, your host for this podcast. I would like to thank you for joining me today, and I invite you to follow this show as I engage in conversations with people from all walks of life, all professions, but all with one thing in common. That common link, they have a voice with purpose. My hope in bringing you Voices with Purpose is to offer encouragement and inspiration and perhaps help you launch your voice with purpose if you have not already done so. So be sure to check out my website, Dr. T Consulting, for more information and valuable resources. My guest today is Jennifer Edwards. She is a certified financial planner, a financial wellness specialist with advanced training in financial therapy and trauma of money and the psychology of money. She has spent over a decade helping more than 600 individuals and couples from diverse backgrounds transform their relationship with money. Jennifer is the creator of the 7-layer financial wellness framework, a groundbreaking approach that reveals why most financial advice falls short and what actually works. From systemic inequities to nervous system dysregulation, she uncovers the hidden forces shaping our financial lives and helps audiences shift from shame and struggle to clarity and confidence. Jennifer, welcome. We're thrilled to have you on the show today.
Hi, Dr. T. I'm so happy to be here.
I know when we look at the scriptures, we see many parables that Christ provided in teachings and Proverbs and elsewhere about wise investments, from early bird catches the worm to planting in good soil. So we're really excited to have you today to provide us some insight, how we should go about looking at money, our investments, and just that whole realm that certainly would support a successful faith walk.
Yes, I'm so glad that you're having me on to help your listeners understand this, because as we know, the Bible is subject to lots of different kinds of interpretations, and maybe those interpretations even change through time and different situations that we're in. And in our current economy, what does it mean for us as Christian followers? What does God expect of us? And how do we actually please him as we interact with money, which is ubiquitous to all of us, what we all have to do, and you can't avoid it. So what's really expected of us? We're going to explore it. I may not have all of the answers, but maybe give you some things to think about.
I think where I would love you to start, and probably our listeners, is talk more about this 7-layer program that you've developed.
Yeah, the 7-layer framework really helps us understand why we interact with money the way we do. It kind of gives us a basis for understanding our money behaviors that helps us to diminish, hopefully eliminate financial shame. And one of the things that we know is we're getting into more trauma research and understanding the nervous system and how it impacts our ability to think and to feel correctly, that it really can impede our relationship with God if we are walking in shame, if we are walking with a sense of not just that I maybe did something wrong, but that I am bad, or I am not worthy of God's love. We want to get out of that, especially as it relates to money, something as very earthbound as the money and the economic system that we have. That's a really important thing for, I think, everybody to understand. So my 7 layers explain the broader systems and the deeper forces that shape our money behavior. So I'll just run through them real quickly. We've got more detail on my website if you want to get into that even more. So we'll go from the macro level down into the micro level. The first one is the societal level. So these are the systemic forces that impact our ability to be successful with money. So recognizing that some things are just not possible. You might want to say, I want to be a completely ethical consumer. I don't want to consume anything that has any connection to exploitation or any kind of mistreatment of people. And the system may just be set up in a way that doesn't allow you to do that fully, that makes us all have to compromise and say, okay, well, what's most important here to me, and what is the Spirit guiding me to actually? How do I do this in a way that pleases God, knowing that the system isn't perfect? It may even relate to our understanding of the fall. Right, we're not in heaven, so this is part of our existence. So things like sexism and racism and, how the economy works in general, the debt that the country holds that's just not in our power. Just recognizing that creates the environment in which we interact with money, and it may make it possible for, like, if you have a ton of credit card debt, knowing how our system, how our culture in America promotes things like consumerism to overcome pain. So there's the teaching that we shouldn't be feeling pain. That's not biblical. Pain is part of life. And then two, that in order to escape the feeling of pain, the best thing to do is consume something, a chemical, or you can go out and shop or gamble, or, do something to get rid of that sense of pain. So those are some of those systemic forces. So just thinking about that as you think about, oh man, I have this problem with money. Well, there's these things that are totally outside of your control that probably impact that. The next layer is relational. So you might have a family that has some dynamics, a romantic partnership or extended family, that make it very difficult for you to reach your financial goals or to interact with money the way that you want to. So we recognize that nobody is an island, that your relationship with money is inside of this family system. And so sometimes we address things there. I was just on a call recently with the client, and they're preparing for a wedding, and the father of the bride has some opinions about how she's spending the money. So, she texted me and kind of like, I feel like I have to choose between pleasing my dad or, this experience that I want to have that my partner and I have decided is important. So, would definitely need to address those and recognize that impacts our relationship with money. And then the ones that are most often talked about in terms of how you succeed with money are educational. So that's the literacy stuff. Maybe you just don't even know how credit scores are computed. And so you can't succeed at being, having a decent credit score if you don't know how that works, or how investing works, or even just like, what does it even mean to have a budget? Maybe you've never been taught. So that educational layer is definitely in there, but we don't overemphasize it as being the only place where behaviors can change. And that brings me to the next layer, which is behavioral. So sometimes that's the only thing that people are saying, oh, you need to start this new habit, or you need to just start spending less. You have these areas in your budget that you should be spending less, and that's a behavioral thing. But if we have some broader and deeper things that we need to work on first, starting at that behavioral layer will actually cause more problems than it solves, because it will increase your shame as you fail at changing those behaviors, because you may not be understanding where that really starts and going, I need to actually address this relational layer or a different layer altogether before I try to change my habits. So below that is the physiological layer. So understanding how our bodies, our minds, and our spirits interact to create stories around money that then impact our physiology. So the stress response would be in here, your diet, eating and exercise habits would be in here. All of that impacts your ability to be just the general, don't go shopping when you're hungry kind of thing. Like that's going to make things difficult, right? So certain physiological forces at work. And then the psychological layer, there's a lot of people giving a nod to this. We're kind of acknowledging that there's a mindset, right? There's like a money mindset, and you've got to maybe address that mindset before you can make true progress in something. So we discuss the beliefs that you come to adulthood with that were formed in childhood that you probably never explored or vetted. And they're directing your behaviors with money today unless we change them purposefully. There's subconscious responses you haven't really chosen, formed a belief without a whole lot of guidance probably. And so we need to address those psychological forces usually before we can make a whole lot of progress in some of the other areas. And then this one is where I really want people to start most of the time, is just making sure that we don't have a trauma response. The neurological layer, what's happening in our nervous system. Again, very automatic. Your brain is interpreting something as a threat. It could be just the thought of sitting down and looking at your bills and outlining like, how much debt do I have? And what's my income and my outflows? If your nervous system sees that as a life-threatening action, then no, you're not going to make any progress until we actually learn that nervous system regulation and get you to a point where you can approach money in a calm. And that's also, the long-term thinking part, the strategy part of your brains, it can't really be accessed unless you're not in that threat response. So when I see that show up, we say, well, that's definitely where we have to start. And that's the case for a lot of people.
That is really good. And I was actually making notes and writing your 7 layers down as well. And so really with this 7, did I hear you correctly? You're indicating one of the best places to start is with number 7?
With the neurological layers. So we first learn about them. And then most of the time we say, okay, what's your main financial hangup that you came to me with? And whether that's, I can't get a control of my spending. And so I'm breaking up all this credit card debt and I'm feeling so overwhelmed by that. And when we explore the 7 layers and we go, guess what? That's not entirely your fault.
Yeah.
And we say, we just disconnect this from our fault and our responsibility. I say, it's not my fault where I am, but it is my responsibility where I go from here. Just connecting that, and that kind of as a mantra for the first little while will start to help somebody go, all right, now I can access creativity. I can get into compassion. I can start to think strategically about how to deal with this. But if I'm just living in shame around where I am, then, that's really not accessible yet.
I really appreciate the holistic approach because there are those many components. And as a psychologist, I definitely see the overlap and the interference and in the influence on all of these upon each other. You differentiated, which I appreciate, behavioral from psychological, and psychological being more the mindset and behavioral being more that what we do. But the reality is that we act out according to the mindset. All right. So we might wonder, all right, I'm going to try to change this behavior. But if we haven't addressed the thought processes and the way we formulated conclusions and perceptions and perspectives, it's like swimming upstream. We're going to have trouble making any progress. And then again, it reinforces that self-defeatedness and the shame and the guilt because we don't pull it off. And I think
you're not going to be able to get anywhere.
Exactly.
And then you're going to say, well, see, that just shows I'm not good I can't succeed at this.
And then even with the number 7, talking about response and trauma response, because those are things that develop as we continue to struggle or not succeed, then we have those triggers out there and the similar things that have caused that. And initially we get exposed to it. We have that physiological response. And then of course that formulates that perception and affects our behavior, which all affects our results and outcomes. So I think addressing this holistically and the way you've laid this out is absolutely wonderful. So then this is something that when people get in touch with you, you teach them through a course. Is it a 7-week?
Yeah.
Or how, tell me a little more about the actual framework, how it's played out and is presented.
Yeah. So what I do is when someone contacts me, we just have a quick 20-minute and we talk about whether or not it would even make sense for us to continue working. So sometimes it's just something outside of my realm. A lot of times people will see therapists and they'll think that I'm doing the kind of therapy that they just kind of imagine what regular therapy looks like. And I'm like, well, this is really around what is happening with your finances and your relationship with money. And they're like, oh, well, I'm fighting with my spouse, but it's not around money. I say, okay, well, let's find you a couples therapist or something like that. But most couples are fighting around money. So there's usually something we can do there. But the way and the key is that's not actually about money. It's about what money means to each of them. So that's just the little tidbit there. But so people will contact me. We'll have that 20-minute intro. Then usually we'll schedule the deeper call, a 1-hour call to get into the actual, we start to explore the story and just kind of go, okay, what's really happening here? And that's where I figure out, okay, what is the kind of coaching package that would work for them? And so I have, some different offerings, but the main one that most people find works for getting whatever issue that they have to resolution, remembering that it takes a while for the brain and body to accept a change, especially a long held belief and pattern like that. So it's more like a year to 18-month relationship. But what we do is I have a list of courses or a list of classes really, and we build a course out of those. And then there's usually the 5 financial wellness basics is where the very first one is that intro to financial wellness. And we go in depth into the 7 layers, and we go in depth into financial shame. And that usually helps to release a lot of that so we can move forward in a more structured, calm way. And then the next, depending upon what they need, if they're a trauma specialist, then I'm not going to teach them the trauma class, but most people are not. So, we've got the beliefs one, we've got dopamine, understanding consumerism, just some basics there that get most people oriented into what's actually going on, what money means. They would do some exercises. Right now, these are one-on-one coaching sessions as I'm still developing the actual, they'll turn into on-demand classes so that they can just pick what they want and then just do them. And then we have our meetings where we integrate those into their financial situation. So we'll talk about like what was going on for you as you were experiencing these exercises in the financial wellness session. Right now, we're still doing those live and one-on-one. So they're experiencing those 7 layers. We're talking about them. We're identifying where their hang-up lies, which layers are affecting it. And then they're like, oh man, like if you're a Black woman in America, you've got tons of systemic issues hindering your ability to be successful with money that didn't have anything to do with your choices. So look at all of those in depth together.
And basically then taking someone that has been struggling with this for who knows how many years in regards to their success, their decisions, their choices, things that they've experienced, and helping them work through all those missteps and those misgivings and those misperceptions and get that approach into something that will work for them. And then also helping them work through the past guilt and shame that's associated with that. And then once they're on this level playing field, so to speak, and they're recharged, they're renewed, and they've worked through much of this, and they have a better understanding and have let go some of the shame and guilt, what are next steps?
So usually we identify a limiting belief, and we start working on actually the techniques to you're reprogramming your brain. Sure. And it can be done. It can't be done without being deliberate, though. And you usually need a guide to kind of help you see what you can't see about how you're interacting with money and looking at it. So we work on a limiting belief. Sometimes over that long period of working together, we'll work on 2 or 3. We'll get to the one that most impacts their financial relationship. And then sometimes there's a secondary one and a third and a tertiary one that will, we're like, okay, we're getting deeper and deeper. And then they start to see, I'm thinking about money differently, because the first step in all of this is an awareness. And we say, okay, so now we have to try to interrupt that process of, I'm spending mindlessly to get a dopamine response to numb some pain. And so we'll do some reflection at the end of the day that says, when did I do this? We're not trying to stop it yet. We're just trying to say, yeah, I did that. Just to acknowledge and recognize that pattern that emerged. And then we do some retraining and we kind of think through that whole experience and say, what could I have done differently that might have had a different outcome instead of spending, $200 in a way that doesn't really align with my goals and isn't really important to me. So, then we're actually outlining strategies, and we're looking at their cash flow, and we're making some goals, and we're setting down like, okay, we see here now, we're looking at how much have you spent in this area. And when we think about it and look at it, and now we have this framework that says, I can now do this in a way that's intentional. We recognize, you know what? I've been spending, $1,000 a year in this area that's actually not all that important to me. And then we can redirect those funds to something that's more in alignment with what they want to accomplish.
So once you get them, let's just use the word stabilized and work through much of this and reprogrammed, or however we want to term it, but then you actually help them with next steps, looking at how can I be financially smarter? How can I make better decisions? How can I make better investments? So you take them to that after the initial work is done. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not actually a registered investment advisor anymore. So that was my previous job. And then when I saw that there's so much more going on here and that my CFP training didn't prepare me for that emotional psychological side, even though we have plenty of money, I've got clients with plenty of money and they're still super anxious about things. Yeah. They can't let go of that. There's so much scarcity mentality that they're not able to give philanthropically, which is what they say is their value. But then when you say, hey, we're going to watch, $4 million go down to $1 million. Down to $3 million. They can't handle that, even though 3 million is plenty, and so that's why I made that switch.
Yeah.
So sometimes I will bring on board and say, hey, we need to work with the financial planner for the actual plan itself. But I can definitely look at the whole thing and say, hey, our savings rate's not high enough. And if they're just using a 401k with a target date fund, I can say, we need to up this from 7% to, 10% or whatever, get the full match or whatever, things like that. Or let's try to max our HSA before we, just put it into a brokerage or what, I can definitely comment on the structure of the plan. But for most people, it begins with that regular cash flow not being enough to sustain whatever lifestyle they're saying they want. So we really help figure out what is it that you really want and then support your long-term goals so that you can take care of your future self, really what that's all about.
No, that's really good. I haven't seen programs out there like you've built to address this holistic approach. I recall throughout my career dealing with a number of individuals that had a lot of financial strain. And, no matter how much we would try to change the behavior, it was unsuccessful because they were rooted in a deeper unhappiness or deep-seated resentment. In some cases, just addiction issues, poor financial planning or spending was all an attempt to try to escape from some of those internal pains that they were experiencing.
Exactly. And because any addiction is going to be tied to money, so that's going to impact things. So sometimes I will bring on my favorite kind of therapy is internal family systems. So sometimes I will introduce them to an IFS counselor if there's something deeper that we need to work on before. And that's one of the things that I'm always like, the money thing is this manifestation of a deeper issue. Yeah. So let's deal with the deeper issue. And then we can, then they're like, oh, now I know, I've been able to heal from this thing or that thing and get the support and be resourced and all that stuff. Now I can deal with actually strategizing where I need to go, where I want to go with my money.
Yeah,
and we do
like
see,
that.
I was just going to mention for people out there who are thinking, oh, I really want to work with a financial planner. Hey, I do work side by side with financial planners. So if you find one and you're like, and I want to work with a wellness specialist. But if you look for somebody, ask them about their understanding or their training in the biopsychosocial model. We are seeing that come into a lot of, at least the conversation in financial planning is saying, hey, there's more to their relationship with money than just, they need to see a projection and it will say, yes, you need to save this much. And then they just do it. It doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah, that's really good. I appreciate a program like this because you're setting people up to be successful for many of those that have never been able to be successful for a variety of reasons, but most, if not all, which they did not understand because those things that influence our decision making, particularly in the financial world, can go much more deep than we're aware of.
Yeah. And if you look out there at what the solutions are that most people say, if you're having money problems, the number one thing that is promoted is you need more money.
Right.
And that's not always the case. You can make more money. And I've seen this happen dozens of times where people got a raise and then they continue to overspend.
Yeah.
And that didn't, and then again, with the ultra high net worth people who just feel like I keep kind of doing this with my shoulders to kind of show that it feels like a security blanket to them. And so more and more and more is needed because they still have not satisfied that need for security. It's a very basic childhood experience that they're having. So that and, more education, better habits, they're not acknowledging all of these other things that are involved there.
It's kind of like the bigger house syndrome. We don't have enough room anymore. I don't have this. I need a pull bar. I need that because I have so much stuff. Well, you get it. It's full in no time. And so the issue isn't the size. The issue is this habit that we formulated. And in this whole world of finance, unfortunately, too many people have developed bad habits. We were taught wrong or incorrectly or weren't taught at all. Trial and error got us in many cases, into some bad situations. So it can be a vicious cycle. The shame and guilt and all of those kinds of things that come from not being successful.
Yeah. So one of the things that happens for a lot of people is because the message is more is better. And so then sometimes they don't have the money for it. So then they get it to credit card debt. Just another example of the systemic layer. Credit card interest rates now are up to 30%. and this is where I think, okay, the system shouldn't even allow that.
They shouldn't.
Because a credit card company is only charging you 30% because they believe you will not be able to repay them.
Yeah.
So if they believe you will not be able to repay them, instead of saying, hey, you know what, we're just going to deny you, because they know some other credit card company will take your money, so that, it's just kind of this whole system. That's a systemic thing. Like, it shouldn't even be allowed.
Yeah.
Things like payday loans and title loans and legal loan sharking is really what that is. So, recognizing that, again, the system is impacting your ability to be successful with that. So we take away that shame, and we say, you know what, somebody charging you 30%, it shouldn't even be allowed. Here we are in this circumstance, but recognizing that somebody said yes to lending you money when they really should have said no.
Yeah.
That would have helped stop that cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, you think of the old mafia bosses and the interest they charged on loans, and they didn't care whether you paid them back or not, and they would use methodologies to get it back one way or another, and so do they use the legal system, and it is such a downhill spiral for people when they get caught up in that. So speaking of that, and I'm assuming then you've had to deal with a number of people that have been caught in that web. How do you go about helping people that have these credit card debts, and they come to you and say, I have not been succeeding financially. I've got a mess. I'm almost embarrassed to tell you about it. I am ashamed of it. I don't know where to start. But what you're saying certainly, I think, is something I need. What would you say to that person?
The first thing I say is, we're not going to tackle the debt first. Everybody thinks that that's where the solution lies.
Okay.
I say the first thing that we're going to tackle is why you got into debt.
Okay.
Because that's the foundation. That's, again, like putting a Band-Aid on a mortal wound. We're going to come up with, well, where did this come from? And when they say, oh, I'm overspending because I'm in an abusive relationship, or I'm getting out of an abusive relationship, and this is one of the ways that I seek dopamine. Just getting aware of that, and me just saying, well, no wonder. It's not a wonder to me. I understand perfectly why you have gotten into this credit card debt. And if I had experienced exactly what you were experiencing, I'd be doing the same thing. So that's the first thing that they're like, oh, okay, this is kind of, it's a realistic and reasonable response. Trying, again, the body in that neurological layer is trying to keep you alive. Unfortunately, we're not wired for contentment and happiness. We're wired for survival. And so we keep, sometimes making messes, but they keep us alive. So, we say thank you to those childhood processes that have kept us alive until now. And then we say, but this is no longer serving me. So we're going to try to find another way. Because honestly, like in a couple of months, and it usually only takes a couple of months to start changing that pattern from overspending to spending less. And then the goal is to get it to where it's even for a while, where you're paying the credit card debt off at the same time that you are, bringing in enough to just pay all of your obligations and live on what you have. That's the first goal, is to bring it back down, what I call turning off the spigot. So we're not, overwhelming the tub anymore. And then we start to drain the tub, and then we start to go, okay, now we can, we're getting to the point where the income and the outflows are the same, including the debt payments. And sometimes, there could be a restructuring going on, but that's one of the things that is such a pervasive, I think, unhealthy solution that just automatically says, like, okay, if you're into too much credit card debt, it's because the payments are too high. Well, it's not really because the payments were too high. It's because whatever it was that got you into that in the first place hasn't been dealt with. And so people will restructure their credit card debt, and then 3 years later, they've maxed out more credit cards, and now they're restructuring the next one. And then I've seen debt to income ratios at 80%. And again, I think, how is that even legal? How did a lender even let you get to that point? They should not have even been able to allow you to get to that point, because there's no way for you to survive if you're trying to live off of 20% of your income.
Those are good points, and I appreciate that. I'm glad you added that, because I think there are listeners that, yes, they want to find a way to resolve the emotional conflict. They want to find a way to find more physiologically related muscle bottle relaxation and not be stressed and anxious. They want to find a way to make better decisions and choices and to psychologically look at things better. They want to see that there's an end in sight, that I can make progress to get out of this.
Yeah.
And so I would call it, what you're presenting then, a healing journey, reframing, restructuring, getting to a healthy perspective, but then also you will provide guidance and information on how they can begin to
Yes.
patch the dike leak, turn it around where they can eventually get out of the hole with new habits, new thought processes, and new hopes.
Yep, that's exactly it.
All right, that's wonderful. And to me, Jennifer, that fits right into biblical application. I mean, money is spoken a lot about in the Word, and Jesus gave many parables about planting and sowing. And I think a lot of the stuff that we see, people have basically planted in poor soil and made unwise decisions, and in some cases not invested wisely. So all those things were addressed biblically, and we need people like you that can take that biblical view and perspective and help people to recover and then begin to put it into action successfully.
Exactly. And I think that if we recognize, because what I hear so often from people is, I say, we start with, when we get into the planning phase, we come up with a financial purpose statement. Mm-hmm. What is the purpose of your money? What do you want it to do? And inevitably, they are God-aligned things. They want to enhance and deepen relationships with their family and their church community and their friends. They want to be philanthropic. They want to be able to give back to those who are less fortunate. Never have I heard that, I just want to have so much money in the bank that everybody looks at me and goes, wow, they got a lot of money. That's not anybody's purpose. But sometimes we can't act in alignment with that until these other wounds are healed, really, I guess is what we'd say. And so when they get to that point and they're like, we even start to do a little tithe. Sometimes we do that even before the debt is gone, just so that they can feel that success of, I'm giving back. I feel this sense of abundance. I recognize that God will provide, that there's more than an abundance of resources on the planet, and they're accessing, that framework as they interact with money.
Yeah, excellent. This has really been a very useful and beneficial conversation for our listeners, I have no doubt. And before we wrap up, if you could say one thing or a major point to the listeners in regards to your program, what would be your message? What would you like to convey to our listeners today?
Well, let's just start from the biblical teaching that money is neutral, and it's what we do with it that is really a reflection of who we are and what's important to us and what we're trying to become. So recognizing that it's not good or bad, it's what you want to use it for, and that your worth is not tied to your self-worth. In fact, I really hate this. I work with entrepreneurs, and there's this phrase out there to make sure that you're charging what you're worth. And I was like, you can't possibly charge what you're worth. Your worth is infinite. So it's what the market has determined the value of your product or services, but it's not your worth at all. So just recognizing that, I would say.
That's good. Second question. How can people follow you? How do they find out more about your 7-layer framework? How can people connect with you?
Yeah. So my website is breakthroughfinancialwellness.com. That's the name of my company. Breakthrough Financial Wellness, all in one word. And you'll see the 7 layers described there. You can connect with me. That's the best way. If you think that you want to start having a conversation, there's a link to just book a call. That free 20-minute call will dig into what's going on for you and find a healthy, helpful path forward. We're on all the social media platforms. If you just Google Jennifer Edwards, Breakthrough Financial Wellness, Instagram, or, TikTok or Facebook or any of those things, like and follow us there. You'll see our content that is really, again, trying to promote diminishment of financial shame, working from a place of clarity and confidence so that you can make some real progress.
Excellent. I appreciate that you're going to address some of those root causes and some of the consequences emotionally and psychologically that occur. Likewise, I would really like to encourage our listeners to not let shame or fear stop you from seeking solution and seeking help that could really change your future in regards to finances, investments, current state, financial flow, all those things that we experience every day on this planet. So I would encourage you to reach out to Jennifer. This could be the answer you've been looking for so long. Jennifer, I want to thank you today for being on this show. You've been a marvelous guest, and the information that you've presented is hugely valuable, and I greatly appreciate that. I would also like to thank my listeners for turning into the Dr. T Show, and hope that you will join me weekly as I bring you Voices with Purpose. Check out my website, where you will find resources and information on services, as well as my new book, Awaken, Exposing the Web of Deception, Threatening Our Faith, Family, and Freedom. There's also available a free ebook called Peace Space. It fits into what we're talking about today that would be good for our emotional and psychological realm, and that's ready for a free download. So with that in mind, I'm wishing you all a blessed day. Dr. T out.